should be good. All right. Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. So today we have Liam, and what I've learned about Liam is like this guy is 100% about being remote. So without saying anything more, I'm gonna deem him the remote boss because that's who he is. That's who he embodies. That's what we're gonna be talking about today. So why don't you give our audience a little bit more insight about who you are, Liam?
Sure. First off, thanks a lot for having me on. Really appreciate it. My name's Leah Martin. I am on planet Earth. More specifically, I'm in Montreal, Canada right now. I'm actually working from my closet right down behind me. That's my shower because I've worked remotely from one place or another for almost 20 years from various weird spots. We could probably get into that inside of this podcast. And I love remote work. It is the clear focus of everything that I've done over the last couple of decades. Our mission as a company is we want to empower people's transition towards remote work. We have team members in 43 different countries all over the world, and we've never had an office, and we never will have an office.
Hmm. So I mean, I guess that's the dream of every entrepreneur, every employee is to essentially work remotely, but not everyone gets to that level. So let's talk about like how did you even wake up on a random day and say, you know what, I'm gonna not only work remotely, but I'm gonna create a business that influences and help other people work remotely as well.
It actually came out of a really problematic part of my life, which I think a lot of big growth moments end up coming out of disasters. I was running a business which was providing online tutoring to university students back in 2007, 2008. And I ended up doing pretty well at that business, but I ended up chipping my tooth one day. And I went into the doctor's office and, you got the big light, you sit back at the chair and they draw the light on you. And I remember the dentist gasped. And it's never a good idea when a health professional gasps when they look at you. And he said, Liam, which tooth are you talking about? You've cracked almost all of your teeth.
Wow.
And I said, well, it's this one in the back. And he actually sat me down and he said, like, what's going on here? He thought that I had pancreatic cancer because the year before I had a perfect set of teeth. And it wasn't pancreatic cancer. It was actually from stress. It was from me subconsciously grinding my teeth every single day, trying to make that business work. And so my therapist and my dentist told me that I needed to figure out something else to do in my life, or basically get rid of this business. And I realized that remote work was the opportunity that I had to be able to have a degree of autonomy and freedom inside of my work like no other person can inside of an office environment, but then also provide that same capability to all the people that worked for me. And it's worked really well almost 20 years later.
Wow. I mean, that's a hell of a origin story to kind of mean the fact that you almost lost all your teeth because of it, right? So, with that, right, how would you define yourself, being that you're so passionate about what we're talking about right now? If you could define yourself in 3 to 5 words, what would those 3 to 5 words be?
Boy, remote work advocacy. That's probably the biggest thing. I'm what I would call a fundamentalist remote worker. I could talk to you for half an hour about all the stats showing you that remote work is actually the best thing that you can do inside of your business to not only make your business more successful, but also reduce the level of stress that you have inside of your business. But I don't really want to talk about that. I just want to talk about being able to make sure that everyone has access to these types of work opportunities. Because, I mean, for me, anyways, it has been the single most important thing that's improved my life. And if I speak to all of the people that work for me, I think they have the same context as well.
Hmm. So, I mean, I think that's a great segue, right? So, I mean, you're talking about the employees that work for you and they have the same mentality that you have, and most employers don't usually want their employees to have that mentality. So, what kind of hurdles or negative pushback have you received in that area of expertise, being that you're an employer that's helping your employees understand how to do things remotely?
Yeah, I think onboarding is a really important part of this. I mean, obviously, a lot of that has changed since the pandemic.
Mhm.
In February of 2020, 4% of the US workforce was working remotely. By March of 2020, it was 45% of the US workforce working remotely. That's the biggest transition in work since the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution took 80 years to do. And we did that in March. So it's a complete transformation of how work is currently being done. And you're really seeing now Pandora's box has been opened as a lot of people are being asked back to go back to the office. You're actually losing not all of your people, but you're losing the 20% of people that I would consider A players, the people that actually have at any point 3 other jobs that they can go and get. And they're saying to themselves, listen, remote work is not a nice to have, it's a table stakes issue. So if you want me to actually work inside of your company, you at least need to allow me to be able to work hybrid. But in terms of just direct onboarding, I think at this point, it's really one of those things where we have not encountered probably in the last year anyone that's at least come through our funnel for HR that doesn't have at least some experience in remote work. Another really interesting statistic to pop up, which I love touting on podcasts, is what percentage do you think of employees that get paid more than $100,000 a year are working remotely? What percentage of employees do you think work remotely that make over 100 grand a year?
You're talking about percentage out of the entire workforce, or you're talking
Out
about
of the
like the
United
executive
States,
staff?
the United
United
States
States.
workforce. Yeah. All workers
Wow.
over 100 grand.
All the workers over 100 grand, which kind of puts them more in the director roles. I would say maybe, and again, I'm just shooting in the dark, maybe 5%.
75%.
Wow. Wow.
75% of people that make over 100 grand work remotely. So there's also a big barrier between rich and poor.
Mhm.
If the higher your salary goes, the higher your chance of working remotely. So if you want to go after those high-end jobs, you got to learn how to figure out how to work remotely. If you haven't figured that out, you're unfortunately going to get left behind.
Okay. So, I mean, with those stats, I mean, you're talking about 75% of the workforce on the higher echelon are pretty much working remotely. How does that work essentially for like the corporations that you see, like the president or the VP that are always there? They wake up 5 o'clock in the morning, they're walking in the office, potentially more so like legal services. Like, how do you explain
Mm.
for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk to attorneys, obviously there's some of those things that they got to do face to face, but the vast majority of their work can actually be done remotely as well. When you talk to the people that are asking people back to the office, and I've gone very deep with some of these people saying, why do you want your people to go back to the office? Oh, well, it's a productivity issue. Yeah, but you just told me that they were more productive when they were working from home. Oh, well, it's a culture issue. Well, how's your employee net promoter score? It was higher, wasn't it, the last couple quarters due to working remotely? Yeah, but and at the end of the day, it really boils down, unfortunately, to the reason they're not giving, which is ego. And that's one of the big things that a lot of remote companies do not have. We focus on work, not necessarily the ego around work. So when you go into an office and you're the boss of that office and you get to boss a whole bunch of other people around, it gives you an ego boost. It gives you that power. And that's something that is unfortunately very detrimental towards the success of your business. It's actually really advantageous towards your own personal ego, but it doesn't actually serve the company in the right way.
Wow. So I mean, so you're talking about like ego, and I like this topic. Let's dive down this, unpack this a little bit more, right? So you have ego, but then on the other side of the coin, would you not say that some of them are more like old fashioned and they're used to that mentality of having a workforce and being in that environment, and that's what they've grown up knowing versus being accustomed to the new world?
Yeah, well, and that's another part of this that I think is really important to be able to reinforce. When that switch happened from February to March,
Mm.
I was getting so many phone calls from massive companies. I had a G20 country call me and they said, hey, we have 550,000 employees and we need to take them remote tomorrow. How do we do it? And I said, I don't know. I have 150 people in my company. And they said, well, you're the first guy that's picked up the phone.
Mm.
It was a complete lack of understanding. And the vast majority of those people that I lovingly call pandemic panickers, they kind of did remote at gunpoint. It was emergency remote work. It wasn't actually the premeditated stuff that we've been doing for decades. And a big core piece of that is actually recognizing how to manage remote workers. And managing remote workers is very, very different from managing people in person. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into that that's actually connected to the book that I spent the last year and a half writing with HarperCollins about the subject, really kind of identifying how to manage these people and how they act very differently from people that are, in person.
So I mean, I think this is definitely a fascinating topic, and I mean, we're going to explode your story a little bit deeper, right? So with all these different things that you're doing, you're talking about remote. Not only are you applying a service, but you created like a software platform as well. So let's talk about like how did you go from having a service and then creating a pretty world-renowned software for time tracking?
So that actually came about as well due to my tutoring business. One of the big problems that I had was I couldn't actually equate for the amount of hours the student worked for a tutor. So I'd bill a student for 10 hours. The student wouldn't come back to me and say, hey, I only worked with the tutor for 5. I'd go to the tutor and say, did you work with this guy for 10 hours? And he said, yeah, I billed you for 10 hours. I'd end up having to refund the student for 5 hours and pay the tutor the full 10 hours, of which I actually ended up losing money in the deal. And so this was creating a real problem inside of my business. And my now business partner, Rawson, that I've been working with for about 11 years, he had a really kind of like ratchety, crappy alpha of this application that we now call Time Doctor. And he is a medical doctor, so that's why we called it Time Doctor. And we ended up launching that because it perfectly solved the core itch that I had, which was this aspect of basically lack of measurement and instrumentation inside of the business was completely destroying the business and totally destroying the profit margins.
Hmm, hmm. That's interesting. So I mean, essentially, you created a solution for a solution that you already had a solution for, and then you have this whole package, right?
Yeah. So I think that any entrepreneur, I mean, if you're going to be incredibly passionate about something, number one, you have to be incredibly passionate about whatever you try to solve. But more importantly, I think if you want to delve into that a little bit deeper, it has to be a problem that you've personally experienced. You have to scratch your own itch, because there's going to be a time, whether it's next year, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where you're not going to want to do this because it's really hard. And it's that passion and excitement that you had for solving that initial problem that will get you through those tough periods. So for me, I just knew that that was such a perfect solution to one of the biggest problems inside of my business. And I knew there were a ton of other remote companies, even at that point, 10 years ago, that needed the same problem solved inside of their businesses. And that's what I suggest to anybody to do. Just go after that itch, figure it out. Even if it's not a big niche, at least it's something that you could say, you know what, this now exists in the world. This is an answer to that problem. And at least I solved that.
Wow, wow. So let's talk about this partnership for a minute. I mean, I've interviewed a couple different partners on this podcast, and what I always realize about partnerships that are successful partnerships is that they're polar opposites. One person is highly analytical, the other person is creative, or the other person is very rigid, and the other person is more lenient. So considering like I'm interviewing you right now, and I kind of say you're a ball of energy, you have this enthusiasm, you're very passionate. What is your partner like, and how does that work with your current chemistry in your business?
So you're absolutely right. There's a great book that you should read called, or anyone that's listening right now, called Rocket Fuel, which really explains this at depth. And generally, it goes down to this concept of visionary versus integrator. And so your visionary is kind of like your Steve Jobs, right? The guy that's thinking up these crazy ideas. He's the front man of the business. He wants to be able to talk to people, but does he actually have very good management skills? Not really. Does he have good project management skills? Not really. But he can think about where the puck is going to be. I'm Canadian, so I always think about where the puck's going to be. My business partner is really good at thinking up how to be able to build and scale these businesses. So he's really good at figuring out the operations of the business, how the departments interact with each other, the financial aspects of the business. And it doesn't matter, I actually don't really like the terminology of like CEO, COO, CMO, all that kind of stuff. I don't know if you had seen recently that Elon Musk called himself Techno King for the SEC filings for Tesla. I think all of these kind of terminologies are ridiculous. I think people should just describe what they do inside of the business. And I'm the face of the company, and I think about where the puck is going to be. That's my job. And then my business partner is running all of the operations of the business and making sure that all of the executives inside of the company are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Wow. Of which I am one, obviously. I do have some interesting conversations with my business partner, but inside of that, there are usually inside of those relationships, you wouldn't necessarily be friends with that person. And I think a lot of people have to recognize that to actually build a really fantastic business relationship, you don't necessarily have to be like best friends. Even though Rob is a very good friend of mine, we are just very different people, and accepting that my weaknesses are his strengths and his strengths are my weaknesses are the way that we've built this partnership long term. And more importantly, actually recognizing that we don't get into each other's lane is a really important one as well. So I have a domain that I sit in, he has a domain that he sits in, and we don't push each other's buttons, or we don't get into each other's business, because that fundamentally just slows us down.
Wow, wow. So I mean, with that, I mean, obviously you're a remote specialist. You have like the Time Doctor app. So with your current partnership right now, like obviously there's systems behind the scenes. You wouldn't be where you are right now if there were not systems to kind of keep the balance going. So what systems do you guys currently have to kind of maintain your business?
So I wrote a book about a year and a half ago that's just about to come out about this exact concept. We build our entire architecture on what I'm calling asynchronous management, which is basically the ability to be able to build a business without directly interacting with people synchronously. So no video calls, no in-person meetings. Even though we do have those, they're not necessarily dependent upon the business operations of the organization. So we have processes and systems and standard operating procedures inside of the organization. We also have the automation of reporting. So every single employee inside of the company has a quantitative longitudinal metric that they need to be able to hit, at least one. Maybe they have two or three, but usually it's at least one. And I can see that information, and so can my business partner, and actually so can everyone else inside of the company. Another big thing that we do is we give everyone inside of the organization the same informational advantage, or at least we try to, as the CEO of the company. So everyone inside of the company can get access to the P&L, can get access to everyone else's metrics, all of our process documents. And effectively what this produces is a employee inside of the company does not own a position, they currently inhabit that position. And it's a little bit of a switch that you need to think about. So I'm not currently the CMO of the company. I currently inhabit the position of CMO of the company. And at any point, I can delegate that responsibility to other people. Like if I need to write a book for a year and a half and kind of just not do anything else, because I think that that's actually a much more difficult problem to solve than my current, problems that I'm solving as the CMO of the company.
Wow, I mean, it's definitely a fascinating viewpoint. So it kind of lets me think about like you as a kid, right? Like if we're going back in time and seeing you as a child, were you like the kid in the playground organizing the noise, telling all the other kids what to do and how to do it, and coming up with these grandiose ideas? Like, what kind of kid were you?
Boy, I was kind of coming up with my own ideas. I didn't really care what the other kids did. I mean, they could come and hang out with me if they wanted to, but I'm going in this direction. This is what I think we should be doing. And I kind of just set my own sail. I mean, perfect other example, if you really want to figure out if you're an entrepreneur or not, maybe you're listening right now and you're not necessarily too sure. I have been fired or quit almost every job I've had within 90 days. It's very, very difficult for me to be able to work under someone else's system. And I realized at a young age, I either need to make my own system or get enslaved by someone else's. And I can't do the latter, unfortunately, even though long-term, statistically, if you put 100 put 100 people into entrepreneurship, the failure rate is going to be much higher. It's a much better idea to work for somebody else. I got to work for myself. That's the only way that I can really kind of keep food in my mouth, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, I think it's a positive thing. At least you know it. And some people, they don't know it, and they're still struggling, trying to figure out and kind of figuring out why they're losing jobs and not understanding that they should step out on their own and create their own
Self-awareness.
enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the crux of it right there is, do you know yourself?
Mhm.
And you got to ask yourself some difficult questions. And I think that everyone needs to sit down and ask themselves these questions, because I mean, entrepreneurship is really kind of sexy now, right? Like I even think since the Mark Zuckerberg movie about the social network came out, a lot of people started thinking like tech was really sexy. And we see people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos that are just doing these fantastic things. At the end of the day, there's only a certain percentage of the population that's really built for that, good or bad. And you just have to recognize who you are. And if you're not that, you're going to go through a lot less pain, um, and frustrations if you realize, yeah, you know what? I'm a really good operations manager, or I'm a really good marketer, but I can't actually run a business to save my life. Or even more importantly, maybe you are this visionary person, back to rocket fuel, but you don't actually have the integrator, the person to keep the trains running on time, to really kind of keep you caged in and control you so that you can be directed in the right direction.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, the movie I would use is probably The Founder. Anybody that's familiar with the McDonald's story is kind of like most people could kind of feel that, like you could be 30, 40, 50, 60 years old and you're still trying to figure it out. And then it takes one little minute conversation with the right person who becomes a partner and says, hey, you're not in that type of business. You're actually in this business. And then everything goes off from there. Everything shoots to the moon at that point in time. So I think you're definitely depicting that very, very, very clearly. Would you
Mm-hmm.
agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. As an example, COVID for us was
Mhm.
that inflection point. Remote work was kind of a fun little thing that people did. As I said, it was 4% of the U.S. workforce, but then it jumps to 45% of the U.S. workforce overnight, and all of a sudden, remote work turned into from a nice to have to a need to have very, very quickly. And when you have those inflection points inside of your business, March, April, May, June was one of those. I don't know if you see on those game shows, they've got those like tubes with like hurricane winds and they put $20 bills in the
Mhm.
top. And I'm just the guy trying to like grab $20 bills and stuff them down my bra. Well, that was me for the first 6 months of COVID, and realizing whoever can take immediate action and imperfect action, but immediate action as quickly as humanly possible ends up winning that game. That's the piece that entrepreneurship is really built for. And if you're not that type of person, then you just need to be able to recognize right off the top of the bat, hey, you know what? I'm not that type of person. I'm someone who could either support that person, or I'm someone who could keep tabs on that person. I could harness that person to be able to make sure that they're moving in the right direction, right? Like, I mean, I think if you left Steve Jobs up to his own devices, he probably would have built spaceships. Even look at, Elon Musk right now. Probably Elon Musk doesn't really have many tabs placed upon him. He's doing really good. I think he's one of that rare breed that has the visionary and the integrator locked into one, where he can actually think about a concept, but then actually get it through to product.
Mhm.
But even with a lot of his estimates, I mean, he's going to build androids in the next year. Good luck with that one. We'll see how it goes. But probably he's going to have androids coming out in the next 3 to 5 years that are going to be able to do amazing things inside of our world. And those are the people, again, that you just really need to be able to figure out. Are you that person? Are you the person that needs to work for them? Or are you the person that needs to harness that person?
Yeah, I think Elon is a good example of what we're talking about, right? But even with Elon, though, Elon is not who he is right now if he wasn't who he was 10, 15, 20 years before. So my next question is obviously like your journey. The perception of you being an overnight success is a reality to someone hearing from you the first time, but how long have you been on that path?
Man, I mean, just Time Doctor's 12 years old. Overnight success. I know someone else who's been a mentor of mine for years is Tobias Lipke, who lives in the same city as me. And he's the founder of a company called Shopify, which is a massive e-commerce company, $200 billion valuation. And everyone thinks about Shopify being an overnight success. Yeah, it was a very quick 25-year overnight success, right? Like, these things take time. And the other interesting phenomenon actually is the companies that just pop out of nowhere, they actually degrade as quickly as they expand.
Mm,
It's somewhat counterintuitive, but if I had a business, if I owned a business, and you could say, all right, I'm going to have business one that grows 100% on year one and then probably goes down 50% year two, or do I want a business that goes up 20% for 10 years every single year? I mean, I'm going to choose the slower growing one because
yeah.
the net result is going to be much more profitable. You're going to be able to pull profits out of the business. You'll be able to raise money if you want to. Whereas those like pump and dump companies that are really popping up now, particularly in the side of the tech world, not really the ones that I would attach my particular dollars to.
Hmm. So, I mean, that's definitely an interesting segue to my next question, right? So, Hearing you speak about the terminology and hearing you speak about all the time frames that we're going back and forth about, my next question is more so in regards to like your upbringing. Like obviously you're a hell of an entrepreneur. You've been on this journey for a period of time, but do any of your parents have this entrepreneurial hustle? Are you getting this from like an aunt or an uncle? Like where are you getting this insight from?
Yeah, definitely from my father. He was an entrepreneur, but a failed one. So he was one of those people actually that had the entrepreneurial spirit, tried a couple things. It didn't end up working out. And he ended up getting a job in the federal government, as an example. Actually, well, so I'll share one story, which I think is somewhat heartbreaking for him, but happy that it happened because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't. My father ended up doing deep fried bananas. So you would basically get a banana, you'd put it in you deep fry it, and then you would serve it, right? And he had this little cart, and he invested, a couple $1,000s or something like that in this business, and he was hustling these deep fried bananas. And then he had a business associate that came to him and said, "Listen, I want to be able to start this business, and I need this equipment to be able to start the business. Would you like to come in with me as a business partner, or should I just buy you out?" Right? So buy out the equipment. And he said, "Oh, this isn't really working out right now. Yeah, definitely buy me out." And he pleaded with my father to be able to go in on business with him. And that turned into a business where it's probably not that popular in the United States, but the company's called Beaver Tails. So it's a deep fried piece of batter that people eat, and you put like sugar on it, you put on Reese's Pieces chocolate, that kind of thing, and turned into 560 locations throughout North America, right? And it's just like the road less traveled, right? The left versus the right. But I think you should never regret your decisions. I think once you make them, they're done. And yes, that was the wrong decision, but hopefully it will inform you on how to be able to make better decisions in the future. But he probably walked away from billions and billions of dollars worth of equity by, selling his deep fryer as opposed to partnering with somebody.
So I mean that's a good insightful thing to say. Okay, like when an opportunity knocks, right? Most people won't see it as opportunity, or they'll just sell out or move on, cash out, and not think about the long term opportunity. So with you, if you can go back in time, right? Is there anything that you can kind of think of in your journey to success that maybe something that you missed an opportunity? Maybe there was a mistake made that you can change. What would that? I mean, when would you go back and what would you change?
Oh yeah. I mean, do we have 10 hours for this podcast? I'll give you one. I remember I almost invested in the first ever Bitcoin ATM system. So a bunch of partners of an angel group that I was part of, we wheeled in this Bitcoin ATM to be able to show everyone as a demo, right? And I thought, oh, okay, you know what? I'll put $50 in, and I got 5 Bitcoins back. It's $10 a Bitcoin. My buddy, he put like 5 grand in and got 1,000 Bitcoins out. Now, that was a big win for him. But it was still a big win for me. I actually still have the majority of those Bitcoins. I keep them in a safety deposit box. And, I've basically taken them into dry storage, cold storage. I put them in that safety deposit box, and they're just there for probably at least another decade, because I think crypto is really going to take off. But that's just one example of probably, 20 or 30 other issues that I might have. But if you delve on those, if you keep coming back to those, then you're not actually going to pay attention to the opportunities that are right in front of your face. And you need to be able to be mindful of that. Don't, think of the world as half full, not half empty. And you're actually going to have a much better context, and you're going to be a lot less stressed in your life if you go after the wins. I mean, for me, remote work has been probably the best decision that I could have possibly made over the last decade, right? It has made me incredibly rich. The business is doing incredible. All the different businesses that I have connected to remote work are doing incredibly well. And it was just one of those moments where remote was going well. I knew that the trend line was going this direction. And then COVID just provided the accelerator that just moved us from, 40% year over year growth to 400% year over year growth.
Wow, wow. So I mean, with all those successes that you just itemized out and listed, right? I mean, obviously, it's more so than anything else that you have control over your time. I would think then that gives you an opportunity to potentially create a family or at least be more involved with your family. So how do
Mm.
you currently juggle your family life with your work life?
That's been an interesting challenge because I have a 20-month-old now. And I actually think that entrepreneurship, I mean, that was effectively my firstborn. And now I've got this child that has kicked entrepreneurship to my second top priority. And I ended up pushing up against that for a little while, but then realized, this is something that, I mean, until you have children, I don't think you can really kind of recognize this, but it's this genetic reorganization of your mind. Like it's almost innate. The way that where I want to invest my time is much more with my daughter than it is continuing to build the business. And particularly, actually, I think it would have been different had I still been struggling at the business. I probably would have put a lot more time and energy into the business than into my daughter. But at this point, I mean, I have people that I can delegate to that can do absolutely everything in the business much better than me, which is, by the way, that's the next big lesson, is to move from entrepreneurship to executive. So if you can make the transition from entrepreneur to executive, which most people can't, I do an okay job at it. My business partner does a much better job at it than me. Making that transition can allow you to be able to embrace other interests like parenting, as an example, that I've been really pursuing over the last couple of years, and I love. But I still obviously also love entrepreneurship because I love the mission that we're on and what we're trying to create as a company. But if I had to choose between my daughter and the business is a far second.
Wow, wow. So I mean, just go into like your routines. I mean, obviously, based upon what you said, you like to spend a lot of time with your daughter. So what does your morning routines, your morning habits look like?
I'll tell you the real one. The morning I wake up at about, yeah, I mean, instead of giving you the BS version, that'll make me sound like I'm much better than I am. I wake up in the morning. The first thing that I check is all of my dashboards. How much money did we make? How much money did we lose? Are there any big explosions that I need to be able to deal with? That's about 7:30 in the morning. Then I grind through a couple emails. I break down my day. So I usually do my to-do list the day before, and then I transfer my to-do list into my calendar. So my to-do list is my calendar, and it's a really great way to be able to identify, yeah, I have 6 priorities, but do I actually have time to do all those 6 priorities? Maybe I only have enough time to do 3, and really time blocking that out is an important task, at least for me. By that point, my daughter's up and ready to go to daycare. So we send her off to daycare, and I grind through till about 6 p.m. After that, I go pick her up, go back here for 2 to 3 more hours. And then I usually unwind for like 1 to 2 hours with my wife, just kind of watching Netflix. And inside of that too, I spend at least 1 hour a day reading and trying to educate myself in some context, whether that's like an audiobook or a podcast or whatever it might be, usually connected to exercise, to really kind of just deconnect from the day, but also do something that's useful.
Wow, wow. So I mean, I think you alluded to like my next question. I think earlier on you had mentioned a couple different books. So this question is going to be a 3-part question. So the first part of the question is like, obviously you have one hell of a journey and success story. What books helped you on that journey to get to where you are currently?
So first book I would suggest anyone start with is a 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel.
Mm.
Fantastic book in understanding the philosophical underpinnings of how to not just build a business, but build a monopoly. His concept, I think, is beautiful, which is any business that wants to exist for an extended amount of time must at its core be a monopoly. And you think that monopoly is negative, but it's not. He explains to you exactly how that works. So that's another really big one. I would probably also say the next one actually would be Remote, which is the book that I've got right up here by Basecamp. So this is a really good introduction to how to work and build a business remotely. I have been looking at this book probably for the last couple of years, and it's going to give you that base underpinning. And then I would probably say the next one would be my book, Running Remote, even though you probably didn't expect that one. But my book is going to be the sequel to something like Remote, which is how do you build an organization without actually operating inside of it, which I think is important. And then an honorable mention actually is it's a book on process documentation, and it's at the very tip of my tongue right now. I've read it about 4 or 5 times. Man, I can't remember what it is. I'll tell you in the show notes. It's a very it's a book about process documentation, and I think anyone that's really focused on scaling a business, you need to have process documentation at the core. The book's called eMyth. There we go. I got it. So eMyth is really going to teach you how to build processes and systems inside of your business so that you're no longer working in the business, but you're working on it.
Wow, wow. So the second part of this question, I mean, you talked about being able to listen to podcasts and listen to audiobooks while you're trying to do some working out. So what audiobooks are you listening to currently?
Oh, well, I think actually I just got through a really good one, which was Hardcore History, which has nothing to do with business whatsoever, but a really great way to kind of like disconnect my mind. And inside of it's actually a long form podcast. So each episode's about 4 to 5 hours long. So it's effectively like an audiobook. I just listened to The Explosion in the East, which goes into the psychological mindset of the Japanese government and the Japanese cultural edict and why they were so effective in taking their entire population and kind of reorganizing them on a war footing during the Second World War. And I think that podcast was like 8 episodes, 6 hours an episode. So it was a really,
Wow.
really long podcast, but highly recommend. Very, very good to kind of get into the deep insights of people. Another one is The Basics of Management. And that's another podcast that I've been listening to on a pretty regular basis. Teaches you how to do one-on-ones, teaches you how to be able to delegate, all of those basics. And they've kind of structured it in a way where the podcast isn't really an interview podcast.
Mhm.
It's more a instructional training. So it's effectively an MBA course on management, but over about 30 to 40 hours. And I've listened to that one 2 or 3 times. It's really, really good.
Nice, nice. I think to your point earlier, you were saying that history is not really related to business, but I think if you look at like everyone that has historically done something that they could look back and say, well, how did it start? It was based upon somebody else's history. It was looking at somebody else as a mentor and utilizing that. And you're talking about the Japanese culture. I mean, the Rising Sun is a hell of a culture, being that they're just an island, but they were still to this day a powerhouse globally, right? So
Mhm.
my next question, based upon that, I mean, I think you alluded to some of your books. So, talking about the Rising Sun, let's talk about like Running Remote, your new book.
Sure. So again, inside of this book, I
Mhm.
studied $12 billion plus remote first companies that were remote before the pandemic. And what I wanted to figure out was what was the one thing that they were doing differently than almost all of the pandemic panickers that have currently, popped up in the last 2.5 years. What differences do they have? And it boils down to this, which is a term that I'm calling asynchronous management, the ability to be able to manage people without directly interacting with them. I think Vaishali was the initial person that ended up connecting us for this call, who runs PR for me. She's worked for 6 years for me. We work every single day together. And we have met in person or on video 5 times during that 6 year period. But we work every single day through Slack and through email and through our project management systems. And it's effectively removing the manager as a direct manager, but it's delegating the platforms that we use, the project management systems, the documentation systems as the manager. And then the direct managers are actually more leaders inside of those organizations. Those are the people that get people excited and hopefully bind people together to be successful in the mission that you have as a company. And I can't tell you, when I discovered this, it really felt like I had like a life preserver and everyone else was in the water because everyone else has now gone from working in an office to working from home. But that's not actually remote work. Remote work is where you can work wherever you want, whenever you want. An office, your house, a coffee shop, a co-working space. You can work from a beach. I don't suggest the beach, by the way. You get a lot of sand in your laptop and ends up busting up your equipment pretty quick. But outside of that, I mean, to me, this is really the future of work. And the methodology in order to be able to implement remote work is undoubtedly asynchronous.
Nice, nice. So I mean, I'm just listening to you. I mean, you sound so much like Tim Ferriss as far as like the 4 hour work week. It's like the similarities and the compounding of the systems are very similar, and I think that what you're doing adds on another level on top because I mean, obviously you have the systematic intellect, right? Then you have the actual physical systems, and then now you also have the software. So again, you're bringing a complete package to the table. So my next question is about this package that you're building and you're developing, right? Where do you see what you're doing right now, maybe 10, 20 years down the road?
So number one, I think probably half the S&P 500 is going to be remote. And more specifically, I think actually the majority of remote companies will be asynchronous, and in-person companies, offices can actually use asynchronous work as well, right? So this entire concept of everyone getting into a boardroom and, taking 15 minutes to get up there, you have a coffee break or whatever, and you sit in this room for 90 minutes, of which you maybe only participate for 5 minutes. It's a stupid model. It doesn't actually get work done. The other kind of philosophical architecture that I'm inspired by is a book by my friend Cal Newport called Deep Work. And
Yes, sir.
that book is effectively telling every single individual inside of an organization, get everything in front of you in order to be able to solve difficult problems. So you have no barriers to solving those difficult issues. And unfortunately, the vast majority of barriers inside of organizations are their managers. So this is the thing that, you think to yourself, oh, you're a manager and you're managing all of these people inside of asynchronous organizations that I studied. The managerial level is about 50% thinner than their on-premise counterparts. So there are more people doing work in asynchronous organizations than there are people managing people doing work in asynchronous organizations, which goes back to your original question, which is, well, why are some people apprehensive about going back to the office? Because a lot of them know they're redundant inside of those organizations at this point. There's a better way to do work. It provides more autonomy and clarity if you just delegate these responsibilities to the platform as opposed to actually doing it manually. Because I've been in some of these corporate jobs and, it's like, I tell you my metrics, you tell your manager my metrics, and then that manager tells the boss my metrics. Well, why don't we just create a system where everyone's data can actually be put up automatically, and ideally not even put up manually on a digital platform, but completely automated. So you don't actually even need to put any of this data in there. And then everyone can have absolute clarity and not just give it to the CEO, give it to everyone inside the company. So everyone has access to that data. And that's, to me, the future of where we're going in terms of work. I think if we have that form of radical transparency inside of the organization, then we're going to be able to open ourselves up to so many more opportunities, and people are really going to focus on doing much better work.
Nice, nice. I think you brought up Cal Newport, and deep work is, I would say, it's a tool. Like, and once you understand what that book is personifying about blocking off a particular period of time and getting your synergy and getting into the rhythm, you get way more work done a lot faster. So my next question, based upon that principle, is tools, right? What tools do you currently use to manage and to maintain and manage what you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
So I'll just give you a couple examples. Asana is one of the tools that we use for the vast majority of our meetings. So we have something called silent meetings. So tomorrow I'm actually running my one singular big silent meeting with 8 other executives. And we put down all of the issues that we have, and we debate those issues asynchronously. So we just add comments to the ticket, to the Asana ticket. And if we come to a conclusion on that particular issue, we take the conclusion, we post it at the top of the ticket, and then we clear the ticket. And if we have less than 3 issues for a meeting, we don't have the meeting. We probably meet about once a month, and we're supposed to meet weekly. So that just shows you how many of those issues are actually completely redundant and they're not important towards the core of the business. And you could actually deal with them asynchronously when you can choose to interact with that information. But the issues that are left, also ironically, have nothing to do with the operations of the business or kind of like the nuts and bolts of the business. It almost entirely has to do with EQ issues. Like, this person doesn't like this other person. This person thinks that, they're stepping in on this other person's turf. And to really get down to that core is important, to be, to remove all of those, the BS kind of layers of the onion and get down to the nucleus of what we're talking about is sometimes very, very difficult and uncomfortable for a lot of people that are inside of these types of organizations. But you absolutely need to do it in order to actually do your best work, unfortunately. And a lot of people don't do that. They kind of just bite around the edges of the problem without actually dealing with the big, huge elephant that's in the room.
Wow. Wow. I'm just recapping what you said, and it's phenomenal insight, right? So, leading into my next question, like I want to kind of dive into like your user case avatars, and obviously you work with Keller Williams, you work with Ericsson, you work with Better Business Bureau, you work with Firehouse Subs, just to kind of name some of the brands that you guys have actually helped over the years. So, who is your ideal avatar? Are you more so like on the level of multi-million-dollar avatars, or are you doing more mom and pops, or a hybrid of both?
We actually have three ICPs. So we have BPO Bobby, we have Agency Adam, and then we have Tim Ferriss. So we have three of those. So BPO Bobby are business process outsourcing companies. And those are people that if you've ever called MasterCard or if you've called the customer support line at Firehouse Subs, as an example, it's not the company that's actually picking up the phone. It's a company that's been subcontracted to pick up the phone on that company's behalf. Those are what are called business process outsourcing companies. They actually are the top employer on planet Earth. The most hired, the most popular job on planet Earth is run through a BPO, which is customer service agents. So that's the first demographic that we serve. The second demographic is Agency Adam. So if you think about an SEO agency, a marketing agency, an engineering agency, they really need to be able to account for where time is going. So a lot of agency owners will say, hey, I have 20 clients and I'm cash positive. That's great. But did you actually figure out if every single one of your clients are positive? Because if you use something like Time Doctor, you can actually analyze and figure out, well, 3 of our clients are not profitable. They're paying us, but we're actually losing money to work with them. And we need to either fire them as a customer or we need to raise their prices in order for us to be able to make basically positive ROI, return on ad spend effectively. And then the third category is Tim Ferriss, the people that are really excited about remote work and trying to be able to build out their own remote businesses. And they're just starting on their journey. And those are people that, are hiring 2 to 3 to 4 seats inside of the organization that needs a tool like Time Doctor. And we're happy to be able to serve them as well. They actually are the majority of our customers, but they account for less than 10% of our revenue.
Hmm. hmm. Sounds like the whole top 1%. It works across the board, right? I mean, like what you said earlier about the 75% of business owners being remote is majority of the workforce as far as the higher echelon goes. So with that,
Absolutely.
let's say you can give a word of insight, right? Let's say you're talking to tier one, right? And you're communicating with tier one to say, okay, you could be tier one, but you could easily become tier two, or you could easily become Tim Ferriss down the road. What words of insight would you give to them to help them motivate them to continue on their journey?
Well, if I think about someone that's just starting off, the first thing is remote work is not a nice to have, it's table stakes now. And not only that, there's an opportunity inside of this reshuffling of the deck, which is very exciting. So work has completely changed. I love to steal Mark Andreessen's words from this, who is the partner at Andreessen and Horowitz, basically the most powerful VC firm on the planet. He said, remote work is going to be more powerful than the internet itself in terms of the change that it's going to impact on the world. So you've got everyone right now is on a horse and buggy, and you're going to learn how to build a Model T. And this is going to be an incredibly exciting time for you. If you can overtake that, if you can take on that challenge and you can simply move faster, if you can implement deep work, as an example, at scale, you will be unbeatable in comparison to all the horse and buggies. I don't know. Well, neither of us were alive at that point, but when you think about back in 1915, when the first Model T rolled off the production line, I'm sure a lot of people said, oh, that'll never replace my horse. But 20 years later, all the horses were gone and Model Ts were running everything. And I think we're at that current moment right now. And you need to be mindful about that opportunity that's in front of you, because it could completely transform the way that you do work. And that's by far the most important thing inside of business, is the work that's being done. So you need to be mindful of that. Take these lessons into consideration and really try to run a remote business, not because you necessarily have to, but because it's actually going to be a much more successful business model for you long term.
Wow. So, I mean, with that, how does someone get in contact with the remote boss?
Boy, that's actually quite difficult, because I don't want people to contact me that often, because I have my work that I need to do. But if you want to check out the book, go to runningremote.com. We also run a conference as well, if you're interested in going to that. If you're interested in Time Doctor, go to timedoctor.com. And I probably would say the best place to find me is, I'm at Liam Remote on most of the social media platforms, but the best one is youtube.com/runningremote. We put all of our talks up there for free. And if you want to contact me there, just put it down in the comments and I shall appear. All other forms of social media I have managed by other people, not because I don't necessarily like social media, but because I know for me, I need to apply my time to very specific things. And social media can end up being a major distraction for me.
Nice, nice. So going into the bonus round, I got a couple of bonus questions for you. And my
Let's go.
first one being that you've accomplished so much in your lifespan, right? Like, what is your most significant achievement to date outside of like your family or your child?
Man, I was just going to say my daughter.
Yeah,
uh,
I had to put a cork in that one quick.
yeah, yeah. Man, this is going to sound pretty egotistical. I'm good. I mean, in the context of the Boss Uncaged podcast, it was when I got my first uh first 7-figure check just for myself. So like,
Mm.
the first time that I saw $1 million get deposited into my own bank account, that was a pretty exciting moment. I was like, holy crap, guys, like, are you serious? Like, I'm a cash millionaire. This is insane. And it's going to happen to everyone. If you continue to work on it, it's going to happen to everyone. You just got time and pressure, right? Makes it happen. But yeah, that was just a huge event for me. I almost wanted to print it, but I thought that was too egotistical. I think entrepreneurs, like if I told a whole bunch of entrepreneurs that, they would
Yeah,
love that. But
yeah.
telling regular people, I think they kind of think that I don't know, that's not a really appropriate thing to say. But for me, man, I had just been working about 20 years on trying to get to that moment.
Shit, I would have, listen to the way you're explaining it and it being such a climactic moment for you. I would have made a damn T-shirt. with
Actually, it's funny enough. I just got off the phone with my buddy Mariano, who runs a company called Mural, which ended up turning into a massive, massive company, like multi-billion-dollar valuation. And I remember about 5 years ago, we were in Bali together, and he
Mhm.
got his Series A financing. He secured Series A financing, 14 million bucks. And it's all public now. And I remember him showing me his phone to show the $14 million deposit in his bank account. And that was just like a crazy moment where a group of people believe in this guy enough to put 14 million bucks in his bank account. I mean, that's just crazy when you think about that. And you think about
Yeah.
the amount of time and energy invested to be able to get to that singular moment. I said, dude, you should take a photo. We should do a video. Like, you should just crystallize this moment as much as humanly possible, because and now he's the company's worth billions and billions of dollars. But I think that $14 million Series A is probably more important than the billions of dollars of valuation that he currently has right now.
Wow, wow. Definitely inspirational for any listener that's listening right now to kind of like, you can be at point A, but literally in a short period of time by staying consistent and working towards your goals, then you can execute exactly what Liam is talking about. Going into another bonus question for you, and I think for you it's going to be very interesting, right? If you could spend 24 hours with anyone, dead or alive, uninterrupted for those 24 hours, who would it be and why?
Oof. Probably Newton. No, Da Vinci. Da Vinci. The ultimate. I mean, we didn't really have entrepreneurs back in the day, but if you had to think of someone that was just so multifaceted in his interests and
Mhm.
so incredibly intelligent, Da Vinci. Sit down with that guy for 24 hours. I'd love to be able to come from the future and tell him about all the crazy stuff that we had done just to kind of blow his mind and see how he would react to those types of things.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
you know
yeah,
what? Can I go back again? I got
yeah.
someone else.
Let's go. Let's
Uh,
go.
Augustus. So
Wow.
that was the emperor right after Caesar,
Mhm.
arguably the most successful emperor of the Roman Empire. And he was really the guy that took Stoicism to where it is
Mhm.
now through his mentors and through his teachers. And a man that has absolute power at that level that invests it in things that further build his civilization as opposed to building himself. I think that those are really interesting people to talk to. I'd probably say today it would be Elon Musk would be the closest to that, right? Where he's like, listen, I think that we should have open and honest conversations, and we should make sure that communication is as open as humanly possible. I'm just going to buy Twitter. Like, he could buy himself whatever,
Yeah.
but he wants to spend his money on something that he at least believes, whether you agree with him or not, is empowering free speech throughout the world. And those are people that I find incredibly inspiring, and I would love to be able to spend more time with them.
I think this goes back. I think it was like around like 30 minutes into this podcast, and you were saying something about like history, and I'm just listening to you, and the people like you're talking about. Essentially, they were all entrepreneurs in their own right, right? I mean, and
Absolutely.
I think in today's world, like the echelon of who we're communicating with, like Elon, are essentially following in their footsteps, hands down. Period.
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that when you think about Elon Musk, it's probably a hybrid of Da Vinci mixed in with probably a little bit of Augustus actually at this point now, where he's almost getting in. I mean, when you think about the acquisition of Twitter, you think about the conversations that everyone is having on planet Earth. That is the town square, right,
Mhm.
for the world. And I personally am actually quite excited to be able to see what he'll do if they will accept his offer to be able to get it back to where I think it was about 5 years ago.
Well, I think with Elon, it's some transparency that we're not used to. Like usually, those type of conversations happen behind closed doors, especially in an evaluation of the billions of dollars he's planning on paying for it. People don't hear about that because that's going to affect stock prices, right? So for him to just to come out and say, "Hey, I'm going to buy it, and here's my offer price," it's kind of like for the regular average person to even know these numbers. It's a phenomenal thing in today's world.
Yes, and I think that that's another thing that's really great about him is he's open and honest with everyone, and I think that there's no real closed doors for him as an
Yeah.
individual. And I think that that's actually, I mean, I talked about radical transparency inside of our own organization. When you join our company, you know all of our secrets. You know our P&L. The only thing you don't know is how much people are paid. We keep that information to ourselves, but everything else we give to the employee so that they have the same informational advantage as the CEO. And we just think it's actually right. It reinforces people's mission of the company and gets them excited about where they want to go inside of the organization, and keeps them down to that, man, okay, well, I'm working at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm working at 3 o'clock in the morning because I really want to solve this mission. And these people are being totally upfront with me, as opposed to, um, you know, I have no idea what's going on inside of this organization and I'm just trying to collect a check. You don't want those people in your company.
Yeah, yeah, it makes perfect sense. So going into closing, I mean, traditionally, I always give the opportunity to whoever I'm interviewing to become the host of Boss and Cage podcast. The show is yours. The microphone is yours. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask me?
You know, I would love to know where you get all your merch from, because this is by far the best merch background I have ever seen. And if you're listening to me, it's really unfortunate, or listening to us, it's really unfortunate. The merch, man, it's amazing. And that's probably the top question that I have off the top of my head.
I think it goes back to me being a graffiti artist in Brooklyn, and it's like the more and more I get into marketing, is the more and more I'm realizing that I was born for it back in the '90s. And about graffiti is always about tagging. It's always about getting up. How many times can you put a sticker up? Where's the biggest bubble that you can put up? So really and truly, that's what I'm starting to do with my merch. It's like I'm not even marketing or promoting my merch. I'm just getting up. That's the way I look at it. I'm just sticking a tattoo here, sticking a sticker here,
Right.
and I'm doing some graffiti here, left and right. So.
Where do you think the future of design is going? That's something that, and
Wow.
maybe that's a really open-ended question, and I should get a little
Yeah.
bit more specific about it.
Yeah.
When I see the future of branding, and I actually think personal branding, I think probably within the next 5 years, almost everyone on social media should have their own personal brand. Meaning, like, it's something that's representative of themselves. And I don't know whether or not that's, again, a little too egotistical, but just something that I can give you to be able to say, this is the core of who I am. And you can understand it completely from top to bottom, even though, like, inside of my companies, we have a really important focus on mission statement. So
Mm.
I think I said this at the beginning of the podcast. Our company's mission is we're trying to empower the world's transition towards remote work. That's what we've been doing for the past 11 years. And we focus on remote work advocacy, generousness, determination, adaptability, and passion inside of everything that we're doing. And I can give you like a paragraph breakdown of all of those
Yeah.
things. When we give people, when they join the company, we literally give them that poster and we get them to like learn it and breathe it. And I'm even thinking about doing that for myself. So that people can very clearly identify who I am as a person. And I think the best way to be able to do that is inside of like a personal brand document. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but it's one of those things
I
that I've been throwing
agree.
around on the top of my head.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I think we've seen it done repeatedly so many different times in history, and I think the landmark for our generation would be Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs himself was a brand. He was an asshole, but he was a
Mm.
brand nonetheless. Everything he touched potentially rotten and then turned back to gold, right? And then he had Apple as a brand, and then he had the iPhone or the iMac, all have their own individual brand identity as well. So if you're looking at brand continuity, to what you're saying is there's three aspects to every brand. You're gonna have to either have a product or service, and that needs to be a brand, needs to be able to tell a story. You as the individual need to tell your own individual story that overlaps with that product or service, and then whatever that other third item could be. In the case of Apple, it was the iPhone. Once the iPhone came out, like that brand exploded overnight because not everyone and their mom was telling the story of holding this device for the first time ever.
Mm. Yeah, I remember there was a talk with Simon Sinek about Apple and getting to their why, which is Apple thinks differently. That's their concept, right?
Correct.
So that's the core of their brand. They think differently. They don't think like other people. They don't think like the suit and tie people. They think differently. And that's why they don't actually sell computers. And that's why they could sell a phone, or they could sell a car in the future, or they could sell a TV screen. It's because their brand encapsulates a much bigger concept than just,
Mhm.
well, we sell computers. That's like the end of where they started. Where they started is we think differently as a company, and we want to actually disrupt people that think the same way as everyone else. And I love that concept. And I feel it feeds through it. Like, that is the value of that type of company. I'm sitting in front of a whole bunch of Apple products right now as an example. So, I'm one of those people that spend $5,000 on a computer when I can spend $1,000 for the same computer and get the same functionality out of it. But it's really going back to that core tenet of, I want to be associated with that type of a movement. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And I've been throwing around the concept of personal branding and saying, should that actually be as important as the time and energy that we put into our company branding and our company mission? Because we put a lot of time into it to be able to attract other people inside of our organization. And I was thinking it could actually explain a lot to my friends and family if I was like, hey, you know what? This is exactly who I'm about. here it is, so that you can take that and you know me good and bad.
I totally agree with you. I mean, think about it. I mean, we brought up a couple different big names on the show, right? And Tim Ferriss is a good example of what we're talking about. Like, Tim Ferriss is like the ambience of branding, right? Like, what if you ask the average person, like, who is Tim Ferriss? What is his product? They're gonna be like, I think I heard his name, but they don't know what he sells or he markets or whatever. Versus we're talking about Steve Jobs. We all know that he's Apple, and I think to your
Mhm.
point, Tim could jump into any market sector and do anything that he wants to do because he is the brand. It's the
Right.
Tim Ferriss show. Again, he's self-branded everything based upon him. So you could buy any one of his companies and rebrand it, and he'll still be who he is, and you're not going to be able to buy him as a name. Kind of like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan owns Joe Rogan, right? He is
Right.
a personal brand that's a multi-million dollar brand at this point in time, and you could buy Joe, but Joe's going to come with the show. You're not going to be able to take Joe away from the show and still be successful without Joe attached to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's a good way to think about it. I've been throwing this around in my head for a very long time, which is, something like Time Doctor I can sell, but something like Leah Martin I can't sell, and that's probably a good and a bad thing, because it's really nice to sell a business and walk away with a fat check. You can't really do that with a personal brand. But with that said, I think when I think about personal branding, I'm thinking about just identifying myself very clearly for other people so that people know what they can get. Like, I don't talk to people on social media, as an example, right? That's a perfect example of, it's just like, listen, I got to put my time into something else. I've got a clear mission, and social media is not part of that mission. So, that's something that I think is a critical thing that I'm trying to deal with right now. But thanks for at least opening it up a little bit more for me, because now I've got a clearer idea. I think I'm going to go write a brand document right after I jump off this call.
Well, I see it in your eyes. I see that passion burning, man, and I love to see that with entrepreneurs. I mean, even with your level of success, you're still hungry, you're still motivated to do whatever the next thing is in association to what you're doing right now. So, I mean, with that, I definitely was a pleasure having you on the show. I think you gave hell of insight, hell of energy to where the listener, if you're not motivated to do something after listening to this particular episode, then your heart probably needs to be, checked just a little bit, because obviously this guy is delivering hella value. I appreciate you. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
S.A. Grant, over and out.